Commander Sarah Chen stared at the priority alert flashing on her datapad, reading it 3 times before the words actually made sense. Unauthorized biological nest construction detected. Deck 7, Administrative Section Charlie, under her desk? How was that even possible? She'd been sitting at that desk for the past 6 hours reviewing supply manifests, and she definitely would have noticed something building a nest beneath her boots. Sarah pushed back from her workstation, the chair scraping against the metal floor of the Alliance research station, and peered underneath. 2 pairs of enormous golden eyes stared back at her from the shadows, unblinking and absolutely terrified. Oh no, Sarah's heart clenched as she recognized those eyes. Vrynn CUBS. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Because Vrynn CUBS didn't just build nests anywhere. They built them where they felt safest, where instinct told them they'd found protection. And the cultural implications of that choice were staggering. Before she could process what to do, her office door chimed and slid open without waiting for permission. Talana swept into the room like a silver-haired storm, her pointed ears pressed flat against her skull in a display of distress that Sarah had learned to recognize over their 8 months working together. The Vrynn liaison officer was always composed, always perfectly professional in her fitted tactical jacket and dark pants. But right now her luminescent skin was flickering with patterns that Sarah's cultural training identified as pure panic. Commander Chen. I can explain, Talana said, her voice tight and controlled, despite the fear radiating from every line of her body. Please, before you call security, let me explain why they're here. Sarah held up one hand, keeping her voice gentle. Talana, slow down. Are those your cubs under my desk? The question seemed to catch the alien woman off guard, her expression shifting from panic to confusion. My cubs? No, Commander. They're orphans. From the Vrynn colony ship that was attacked 3 weeks ago. The Alliance placed 17 survivors on this station while the diplomatic corps decides their status. Talana's hands twisted together, a very human gesture she'd picked up somewhere. Most have been assigned to the Vrynn residential sector, but these 2, Kessa and Jin, they won't settle. They keep escaping, and today she gestured helplessly at Sarah's desk. Sarah knelt down slowly, making herself smaller, less threatening. The cubs couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 in human years, covered in fine downy fur that shimmered between silver and pale blue. They'd constructed an intricate little nest from what looked like Sarah's missing styluses, several protein bar wrappers, and half a thermal blanket she'd been looking for all week. Why my desk, Talana? You said Vrynn cubs choose carefully. The silence that followed was heavy with meaning Sarah couldn't quite grasp. Talana knelt beside her, and Sarah caught the faint scent of ozone that always accompanied the Vrynn, like the air before a thunderstorm. Because you saved them, Commander. 3 weeks ago, when that colony ship was attacked by raiders, do you remember the emergency response? Sarah's mind raced back. The distress call, the desperate scramble to get rescue shuttles deployed before the colony ship's life support failed. She'd personally piloted one of the shuttles because they were short-staffed and every second counted. I remember, Sarah said quietly. I pulled maybe 15 Vrynn from the damaged sections before the hull breach. Talana's luminescent skin pulsed with a soft golden light, an emotion Sarah's training labeled as profound gratitude mixed with sorrow. 16, actually. These 2 were in the nest. You cut through bulkhead plating to reach. Their parents were already dead. You carried both cubs in your own arms to the shuttle while the ship was tearing apart around you. Oh no. Sarah understood now, and the weight of that understanding settled in her chest like a stone. In Vrynn culture, the person who saved a cub's life became chevran, a word that didn't translate cleanly, but meant something between guardian and soul parent. They think I'm their chevran, Sarah whispered. They've chosen you, yes, Talana confirmed, her voice barely audible. But Commander, I know this isn't your responsibility. The Alliance will relocate them. I'll call the handlers right now and wait. Sarah's hand shot out, catching Talana's wrist before she could activate her cum. The physical contact sent a small shock of surprise through both of them. They'd worked together for months, but had maintained careful professional distance. Sarah could feel the warmth of Talana's skin, could see her pupils dilate slightly at the unexpected touch. She released the alien woman's wrist quickly, professional boundaries reasserting themselves. Just wait. Let me think. Under the desk, the cubs had gone utterly still, watching the 2 adults with those impossibly large eyes. Sarah noticed details now. The smaller one, probably Kessa, had a ragged scar across her shoulder. The larger one, Jin, was positioned protectively in front of his sibling, despite being barely bigger himself. They'd built their nest in a corner where they could see both the door and the window, tactical positioning that no child should have to learn. These weren't just scared kids. They were traumatized survivors trying desperately to find safety in a universe that had turned violent and unpredictable. What happens if they're relocated? Sarah asked. Talana's ears drooped further. The Alliance has protocols. They'll be placed in the Vrynn residential sector, assigned to a group caretaker until the diplomatic corps finalizes asylum status. It's all very proper and regulated, and, she trailed off. And Sarah heard everything Talana wasn't saying. Cold, impersonal, another loss for CUBS who'd already lost everything. And if I don't report this? If the nest stays? The question hung in the air between them like something fragile and dangerous. Talana's head snapped up, her expressive eyes wide with shock. Commander, you can't possibly mean. You're the head of station operations. You work 16-hour days. You don't have time for CUBS. And the regulations clearly state that cross-species guardianship requires months of paperwork and cultural training. And Talana, Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. The tone she used when she'd made a decision and wasn't going to be argued out of it. I asked, what happens if the nest stays? The Vrynn woman studied her for a long moment, and Sarah felt the weight of that gaze like a physical thing. She'd always known Talana was beautiful, in an otherworldly way that made something in Sarah's chest tighten whenever the liaison officer smiled. But she'd kept those feelings locked down, professional, appropriate. Now, kneeling together on the floor of her office, with two terrified CUBS between them, something had shifted. Talana's expression softened into something Sarah had never seen before, something tender and wondering and almost heartbreakingly hopeful. If the nest stays, Talana said slowly, then, by Vrynn law, you accept the role of Chevron. You become responsible for their well-being, their education, their future. It's not a small thing, Commander. It's a bond that lasts a lifetime. But they'd be safe? They'd stay here on the station? Talana nodded. They'd stay with you? Yes. Wherever you go, they go. That's how the Chevron bond works. A beat of silence. Then Talana added softly, but you wouldn't be alone. Vrynn CUBS raised under Chevron care also have a Vashara and a cultural guide. Someone who teaches them their heritage, their language, their customs. Sarah's heart was hammering now. And who would that be? The look Talana gave her could have melted hull plating. I would, Commander. If you'd allow it. The responsibility would be ours to share. Ours. Such a small word to carry such enormous implications. Sarah glanced back at the CUBS, at their makeshift nest, at the hope and fear warring in their golden eyes. She thought about duty, about regulations, about all the reasons this was complicated and difficult and potentially career-limiting. Then she thought about the feeling of those small bodies clutched in her arms as she'd run through a dying ship, about the promise she'd made to herself in that moment, that she'd get them out, that they'd be safe. Some promises mattered more than regulations. Okay, Sarah said, and watched hope bloom across Talana's face like sunrise. Okay, the nest stays. The transformation was instantaneous. The CUBS chittered excitedly, a sound like wind chimes and purring mixed together, and emerged from under the desk in a tumble of silver fur and grabbing hands. Kessa attached herself to Sarah's leg with surprising strength, while Jin wrapped his arms around Talana's waist. And suddenly Sarah's orderly office was full of noise and movement and something that felt dangerously close to joy. Over the CUBS' heads, Sarah met Talana's eyes and saw her own emotions reflected there. Wonder, terror, hope, the bone-deep knowledge that everything had just changed. I have no idea what I'm doing, Sarah admitted, laughing as Kessa climbed her like a tree. Neither do I, Talana confessed, her professional mask finally cracking into a genuine smile that made Sarah's breath catch. Human-Vrynn cooperation in cub rearing is unprecedented. We'll be making this up as we go. Jin chirped something in rapid Vrynn that Sarah didn't catch, but it made Talana laugh, a sound like silver bells. He says your office needs more blankets. Apparently, this nest is insufficient for a proper Chevron. Sarah looked at the chaos of stolen items under her desk and felt something warm unfurl in her chest. Well, we can't have an insufficient nest. Guess we'd better fix that. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity that would have seemed absurd to Sarah's earlier self. Talana explained Vrynn nesting requirements while Sarah raided the station's supply closets for approved materials. The cubs supervised with the seriousness of tiny architects, chattering instructions in a mix of Vrynn and broken standard that Talana patiently translated. Kessa says the thermal regulation is inadequate, Talana relayed, trying to keep a straight face as the small cub gestured imperiously at a corner of the expanding nest. She's quite particular about temperature gradients. Sarah adjusted the heating element she'd liberated from engineering, catching Talana's eye as they both tried not to laugh at being bossed around by a 6-year-old. Is this what parenting is? Taking orders from someone 2 feet tall? Welcome to Chevron life, Commander. Something had shifted in how Talana said her title now, warm with affection rather than formal distance. Their hands brushed as they arranged blankets, lingering a half-second longer than necessary. Each accidental touch felt electric, charged with possibilities neither of them had acknowledged before. When the nest was finally deemed acceptable by its tiny critics, the cubs burrowed into the center with satisfied chirps and were asleep within minutes, curled together like question marks. Sarah and Talana sat back against the desk, shoulders touching, watching the gentle rise and fall of cub breathing. You know this is going to be complicated, Talana said quietly. The paperwork alone will be a nightmare, and Command will have questions about protocol violations. Sarah nodded, too tired to worry about consequences right now. I know, we'll handle it. We, Talana repeated, testing the word. I like that word. Me too, Sarah thought, but didn't say. Instead, she let her hand rest on the floor between them, palm up and offering. Talana's fingers laced through hers, and the touch sent warmth racing up Sarah's arm. They sat like that in comfortable silence, 2 people who'd been carefully professional for months finally allowing themselves this small intimacy. Can I tell you something? Talana asked, her voice barely a whisper. When I first came to this station as liaison, I was terrified. The Alliance and the Vrynn Collective have such different cultures, and I was certain I'd fail at bridging that gap. Then I met you. Sarah turned to look at her, finding Talana's face closer than she'd expected. The alien woman's luminescent skin cast soft shadows across her delicate features, highlighting those pointed ears and enormous eyes. Beautiful, Sarah thought, not for the first time, but now she didn't have to suppress the thought. You made me feel safe, Commander. The way you listened, really listened, to Vrynn concerns. The way you fought for resources for the refugee sector. The way you treated every being on this station with dignity, regardless of species. Talana's thumb traced small circles on Sarah's palm. I think the cubs chose you for the same reason she paused, seeming to gather courage. For the same reason I've been hoping for months that you might see me as more than just your liaison officer. Sarah's heart stopped, restarted, then raced ahead at double speed. Talana, you don't have to say anything, Talana said quickly. I know it's complicated. The regulations about fraternization between command staff and diplomatic personnel are clear, and I shouldn't have said anything. But today, with the cubs, I thought maybe. Sarah kissed her. It wasn't planned, wasn't smooth, just a quick press of lips to silence the nervous, rambling, but it sent lightning through her veins. When she pulled back, Talana was staring at her with wide eyes and slightly parted lips, her skin flickering through a rainbow of luminescent patterns that Sarah was beginning to recognize as shock mixed with happiness. I've wanted to do that for 6 months, Sarah confessed. Since the trade delegation dinner, when you laughed at that terrible joke I made, and your whole face lit up. But you're right, it's complicated. Complicated, Talana agreed, then smiled slowly. But we're already violating about 17 protocols by creating an unauthorized nest and initiating cross-species guardianship without proper documentation. What's one more complication? Sarah laughed, the sound startling in the quiet office. When you put it that way, they kissed again, slower this time, exploratory and sweet. Talana tasted like the cinnamon tea she was always drinking, and her hair smelled like ozone and something floral Sarah couldn't identify. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling like idiots. A small chirp from the nest made them jump apart guiltily. Jin had raised his head, golden eyes watching them with what Sarah could have sworn was approval, before he burrowed back against his sister and resumed sleeping. Do you think he? Sarah started. Cubs are very perceptive about emotional bonds, Talana said, fighting back a smile. He's probably been watching us dance around each other for months and thinking humans and adult Vrynn are ridiculous. We are a little ridiculous, Sarah admitted. She glanced at the chronometer on her desk and winced. 2,300 hours. Her next shift started in 7 hours, and she had a feeling sleep wasn't happening anytime soon. We should probably figure out the logistics. I can't exactly run station operations with a nest under my desk permanently, Talana nodded, slipping back into professional mode with visible effort. I'll file the Vrynn paperwork first thing tomorrow. It'll take a few days to process, but I can cite cultural emergency provisions. In the meantime, the CUBS can stay in my quarters. It's larger than standard officer housing, designed for Vrynn comfort, our quarters, Sarah corrected gently. If we're doing this properly, if we're both taking responsibility for them, then we should probably. She trailed off, suddenly nervous. Was she really suggesting they move in together after one kiss? But Talana's face had lit up like a supernova, her skin glowing golden with joy. Our quarters. Yes. Yes. They grinned at each other like fools. And Sarah felt the future shifting around her, rearranging itself into a shape she'd never planned, but somehow felt absolutely right. The next morning, Sarah sat across from Station Commander Williams, watching the older woman's face cycle through disbelief, frustration, and finally, reluctant amusement as she read the Vrynn petition. Commander Chen, when I assigned you to operations, I expected supply chain optimization, not cross-species adoption and cohabitation with our Vrynn liaison. Williams set down the datapad and fixed Sarah with a stern look that didn't quite hide the smile tugging at her lips. These are serious protocol violations. Yes, ma'am, Sarah agreed, keeping her spine straight and her voice level. I take full responsibility. And you're certain about this? The CUBS, the cultural obligations, the relationship with Officer Talana? Williams asked, her tone gentling slightly. Because once this paperwork goes through, it's not something you can easily undo. Vrynn bonds are recognized under alliance law as equivalent to legal guardianship, and serving as co-guardians with Talana means you're committing to years of shared responsibility. Sarah thought about Kessa's small hand, trustingly clutching her sleeve that morning, about Jin's excited chatter over breakfast, mixing 3 languages in his enthusiasm to explain proper nest architecture, about Talana's smile across the table, warm and hopeful and real. I'm certain, ma'am. Williams studied her for a long moment, then sighed and approved the petition with her command code. You're a good officer, Chen. You see people, not just problems to solve. Those CUBS are lucky to have you. Both of you. Relief flooded through Sarah. Thank you, ma'am. I won't let it interfere with my duties. See that you don't. And Chen? Williams smiled properly. Now, for what it's worth, I think you and Talana are good together. It's about time something positive came out of this damned refugee crisis. Sarah left the commander's office feeling like she was floating. The next few weeks were chaos of the best kind, moving their belongings into combined quarters while the CUBS helped by stealing anything shiny and adding it to their ever-expanding nest, navigating curious looks from other station personnel who'd heard about the unprecedented human Vrynn family unit, learning to cook foods that met Vrynn nutritional needs after a disastrous first attempt that had. Both CUBS politely refusing dinner and Talana trying desperately not to laugh. It's supposed to be protein stew, Sarah said, poking at the congealed mess with a spoon. I followed the recipe exactly. Talana peered into the pot, her nose wrinkling adorably. Darling, I think the recipe meant fresh Xerix root, not the processed powder. This is technically edible? Technically edible. High praise. Sarah dumped the whole pot in the recycler while the CUBS chirped their amusement. Okay, new plan. You cook. I handle everything else. Deal. Talana agreed, then paused. Did you just call me darling earlier? Sarah froze, replaying her words. She had unconsciously, and the term of endearment had slipped out so naturally she hadn't even noticed. Yes? Is that okay? I know we haven't really defined what we are yet. And if it's too much, Talana silenced her with a kiss that tasted like the sweet tea she'd been drinking. It's perfect. You're perfect. This whole strange, complicated situation is perfect. Kessa made a gagging sound from the nest, and Jin threw a cushion at them, chittering something that definitely sounded like get a room. We have critics. Sarah laughed against Talana's lips. Harsh critics, but as she looked around their shared quarters, at the massive nest that now dominated the living area, at the CUBS wrestling over a datapad, at Talana's belongings mixed with her own, like they'd always been together. Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since leaving Earth. Home. This felt like home. 3 months later, Sarah was finishing up a shift when her CUBS chirped with a priority message. Talana's voice, tight with controlled fear, cut through the channel. Sarah, we have a problem. The diplomatic corps just issued a ruling on the Vrynn asylum cases. They're approving relocation to the new colony on Thessera IV. Sarah's blood ran cold. What does that mean for our CUBS? It means all Vrynn refugees are being transferred into weeks unless they have compelling reasons to remain. Chevron bonds might not be considered compelling enough by the review board. They're treating it as a cultural formality rather than legal guardianship. No, absolutely not. Sarah wasn't losing those kids, wasn't watching them be ripped away from the home they'd finally settled into. I'll handle this, she told Talana. Trust me. She cummed. Commander Williams called in every favor she'd accumulated and drafted a proposal that she transmitted directly to Alliance Command. When the review board convened via subspace link 2 days later, Sarah stood at attention, with Talana beside her, and made her case. Members of the board, I'm not asking you to make an exception to asylum relocation. I'm asking you to recognize that these CUBS already have a home, already have guardians, and already have legal protection under Chevron law, which the Alliance recognizes in 17 treaty agreements. She pulled up precedent files, cultural documentation, and the clincher. An analysis of station integration statistics showing that the other 15 Vrynn refugees had chosen to remain on the station after seeing Kessa and Jin's successful placement. Forcing this relocation doesn't just harm the CUBS. It undermines 6 months of integration work and sends a message that the Alliance doesn't respect Vrynn cultural institutions. The board deliberated for 3 hours. That felt like 3 years. Finally, the senior counselor's face reappeared on the view screen. After careful review, this board recognizes the Chevron bond between Commander Chen, liaison officer Talana, and the CUBS Kessa and Jin as legally binding guardianship. The CUBS are exempt from mandatory relocation. Furthermore, we're issuing new guidelines for all Alliance stations to respect and accommodate similar cultural bonds. Sarah's knees went weak with relief. Beside her, Talana grabbed her hand, squeezing hard enough to hurt, her luminescent skin blazing with joy. When they returned to quarters, the CUBS ambushed them with questions fired at rapid speed until Talana laughingly explained in Vrynn that they were staying. This was permanent. This was forever. Kessa and Jin tackled Sarah in a hug that knocked her onto the couch, chattering their happiness in a mix of languages that Sarah was finally starting to understand. Over their heads, Sarah met Talana's eyes and saw her own emotions reflected there. Love, family, home. That night, after the CUBS finally crashed from excitement and were sleeping peacefully in their nest, Sarah and Talana stood on their quarters' small balcony overlooking the station's central atrium. Talana leaned against Sarah's shoulder, fitting perfectly against her side, like she'd always belonged there. Thank you, Talana said softly, for fighting for them. For us. Sarah pressed a kiss to the top of Talana's head, breathing in her familiar scent. You say that like I had a choice. They're ours. We protect what's ours. We, Talana repeated, the same way she had that first night. Still my favorite word. Below them, the station hummed with life, thousands of beings from dozens of species living and working together. Humans and Vrynn, Calyx and Thorians, all finding ways to coexist and cooperate, building something new from the ashes of war and loss. Sarah thought about the report that had started everything. Unauthorized nest detected. Unauthorized, maybe, but absolutely necessary. Because sometimes the most important families were the ones you built yourself, piece by piece. From stolen blankets and shared hope, and the courage to reach across differences and say, you're mine now. And I'm not letting go. I love you, Sarah said, the words slipping out naturally, inevitably. Talana's sharp intake of breath was audible in the quiet. She pulled back just enough to meet Sarah's eyes, her own shining with tears that caught the station's lights like stars. I love you too. So much it terrifies me sometimes. They kissed under the artificial stars of the station's light panels. Two women from different worlds, who'd found each other through chaos and CUBS and the simple act of choosing compassion over convenience. From inside their quarters came a sleepy chirp, probably Jen having a dream, and they both smiled against each other's lips. Their family, strange and unprecedented and absolutely perfect. Sarah pulled Talana closer, thinking about the future. There would be challenges ahead. More paperwork, more curious stares, more moments of figuring out cross-species parenting on the fly. But they'd face it together, this little family built from an unauthorized nest and the bone-deep human instinct to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. You know, Sarah mused, Command is probably going to use us as a test case for human-alien integration. We'll be writing reports and giving seminars and dealing with delegations wanting to study our unique family dynamic. Talana laughed, the sound warm and unworried. Let them study. Let them write their reports. As long as at the end of the day, we come home to this, to each other. I don't care what Command wants, we protect what's ours, Sarah repeated, the phrase that had become their unofficial family motto. Always. Talana agreed. Inside, the cubs slept peacefully in their nest, finally safe, finally home. And standing on the balcony with the woman she loved, Sarah Chen looked at the future and smiled. Sometimes the best things in life came from unexpected places. From distress calls and emergency rescues. From terrified cubs building nests under desks. From stolen moments and shared glances that grew into something real and lasting and true. The Alliance would call it unprecedented human-Vrynn cooperation. The cultural historians would document it as a watershed moment in interspecies relations. But Sarah just called it family, and that was all the definition she needed.